Okay, so if you're into video games at all, you've definitely heard the name Hideo Kojima, right? I mean, his name is basically shorthand for these epic, cinematic, and yeah, sometimes totally baffling games that just always seem to be pushing the envelope. So today, we're going to dive into the story of this guy, one of the most iconic and honestly uncompromising creators in the entire industry.
But here's the thing. To really get what makes Kojima so special, you have to look past the games themselves and at the man behind them. In an industry that's so often run by committees and focus groups, he's seen as a true auteur. And that just means he's a creator with a vision that is 100% his own. You know a Kojima game when you see it.
And this quote, this really gets to the heart of it all. He said this back in 2008, and it just perfectly sums up the passion that has driven his entire career. It's all been about one thing, really, this nonstop, relentless hunt for total creative freedom.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Because Kojima's story, funnily enough, doesn't start with a controller. It starts with a camera. His whole unique way of making games, it was being shaped way, way before he ever touched a line of code.
So get this, as a kid, his parents were huge movie buffs, and they had this tradition where the family would watch a movie every single night. And the rule was you couldn't go to bed until the credits rolled. Can you imagine? That deep dive into cinema basically became the blueprint for, well, everything he ever made. So you can imagine what happened when he jumped into the video game industry back in the 80s. It was a total culture shock. He's dreaming of directing these epic stories, but the reality? His friends actually laughed at him for choosing to make games. And the tech at the time? He said the 16-color palette was just too restrictive. He had all this cinematic ambition, but the medium just wasn't ready for him yet.
Okay, and this is where you really start to see the genius kick in. He's facing these massive limitations on his first big project, and instead of just giving up or compromising, he innovates. He literally turns a technical weakness into a brand new type of game.
Let's break down how this happened, because it's pretty incredible. The problem was simple. The old MSX computer just couldn't handle a lot of action on screen at once. Too many enemies, too many bullets, and it would just lag or crash. So what does he do? He looks to the movies, specifically stuff like The Great Escape, where the whole point is to avoid the fight. And boom, that's the solution. He designs a game where you're not supposed to fight, you're supposed to hide. This wasn't just some clever workaround. This was the moment the stealth genre was born.
And this obsession with making games feel like movies, it was absolutely relentless. Even on his earlier games like Snatcher, which was more of a graphic novel style game, people who worked with him said he was always pushing them to make it more cinematic. It was never just about the gameplay for him. It was about the presentation, the mood, the story, all the stuff that would become his signature. So he spent the next 3 decades, almost 30 years, perfecting this cinematic style at one company, Konami. And together, they made some of the greatest games of all time. But that relationship, well, it would end in what is probably one of the messiest, most public breakups the gaming industry has ever witnessed. And it all kind of started with this thing called PT, the playable teaser. It was this terrifying horror demo that just appeared out of nowhere on the PlayStation Store in 2014. And when you beat it, it was revealed to be a teaser for a brand new Silent Hill game directed by Kojima. For a minute there, it felt like the absolute peak, like anything was possible. But then 2015 hit, and everything just fell apart, like super fast. First, you get these rumors that he's leaving Konami. Then his name actually gets removed from the box art of his own games. Then Silent Hills, that amazing project, gets canceled. His studio inside Konami gets shut down. It was just one bad thing after another. And the worst part was still to come. Yeah, so his final game, Metal Gear Solid 5, wins a huge award at the Game Awards, and he couldn't even go accept it. Konami's lawyers literally stopped him from attending the show. Think about that. The creator couldn't celebrate his own creation. It was just a really shocking and frankly brutal end to a relationship that had lasted almost 30 years. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. You could actually say it was a rebirth. This was the moment Hideo Kojima was finally, and I mean finally, set free. This was such a clear turning point, right? He went from being a corporate vice president to being a completely independent creator, a true visionary on his own terms. It was a huge shift. And he didn't waste any time. Literally, the day after his contract with Konami was officially up, he announced that he was back. He'd reformed his studio, Kojima Productions, this time as an independent company with Sony's backing. Just like that, he was back in the game, and this time, he was in complete control.
And what happened next was just this explosion of creativity. First, we got these super ambitious and unique Death Stranding. And then he just started announcing project after project, all completely different. A sequel? Sure. But also a new horror game with Jordan Peele. Yes, that Jordan Peele. And even a new spy game, going back to his roots. The shackles were well and truly off.
So why are we talking about all this? Why does his story matter so much? Because Kojima's legacy, it's not just about making cool cinematic games. It's about his almost scary ability to predict the future, to talk about huge issues with technology and society years, sometimes decades, before the rest of us even start thinking about them. Okay, perfect example, Metal Gear Solid 2. When this game came out back in 2001, everyone was expecting another simple action story. Instead, they got this super dense, super philosophical deep dive into things like misinformation and how digital information can be controlled. A lot of people were just confused. They thought the plot was ridiculous. But looking back at it now, wow, it was so far ahead of its time. Fast forward to the 2010s. All of a sudden, we're all talking about fake news and data privacy and online echo chambers. And critics started looking back at that game, and they were just blown away. They realized that Kojima had basically laid out all of our modern digital anxieties more than 10 years before they became a reality for everyone. And then, unbelievably, he did it again. His very first independent game, Death Stranding, comes out in 2019. And what's it about? It's about a broken society where everyone is living in isolation, totally dependent on delivery workers to connect everything. Does that sound at all familiar? Because just a few months after that game launched, the real world went into lockdown. The similarities were just impossible to ignore, and journalists everywhere started pointing it out. Once again, Hideo Kojima had made something that felt less like a game and more like a prophecy. So let's circle back to that word we used at the beginning. Auteur, a creator with a style that's all their own. I mean, Kojima's entire journey, from that kid obsessed with movies to this independent force of nature, has totally cemented his place as one of the first and most important auteurs in all of gaming. His mark on the industry is just undeniable. So let's just recap. He basically predicted the modern internet. He accidentally predicted a global pandemic. Now that he's totally independent, totally free, it just makes you wonder, right? In an industry that loves sequels and playing it safe, what on earth is a creator like Hideo Kojima going to predict for us next?